Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. The Supreme Court on Friday ruled that the centre cannot deprive NGOs of their right to receive foreign money by declaring them as political organisations if they use legitimate means of dissent to support public causes. Section 5 of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010 gives the Union Government unchecked and unbridled powers to declare an organisation as being one of political nature and denied access to funds from sources abroad. The Apex Court observed it is clear from the provision itself that Bandhs, Hartals, Rasta, Rokos, etc. are treated as common methods of political action. Any organisation that supports the cause of a group of citizens agitating for their rights without a political goal or objective cannot be penalised by being declared an organisation of political nature, the court observed. The court also made it clear that organisations used for channeling foreign funds by political parties cannot escape the rigour of FCRA. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse foreign funding of NGOs and the risks attached to it. Joining me on the program today are Satya Prakash, legal editor of the Tribune, Major General Dhruv Katoch, retired director, India Foundation. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. General, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyse the judgment or the ruling of the Supreme Court, and let's find out what do you think about the ruling.
You see, Frank, we have got in excess of 3 million NGOs, 3.2 million or maybe even more as of now in India. Now, on the face of it, when we are looking at what the Apex Court has said, it's a very liberal judgment. But when we actually come down to its practical application on the ground, what appears to be liberal in an overall picture may not actually be that conducive when we are looking into implementation mechanisms on the ground. Now, who is carrying out foreign funding and what is the purpose of that foreign funding? While it is appreciated, and of course the Apex Court has supported that political parties cannot take foreign funding. They have agreed to that. So that is not really the problem. But the question is, what is the nature of a political party and who are the parties who are supporting it? If we look at the Maoist movement today, they have got a whole range of organizations which appear to be social organizations, but which are actually directly linked to a Maoist cause. And they actually go into all these movements of Rasta, Rokos, Hartals, Bandhs to force the government to go on a particular line. The second point which I've got is, when we are looking at any foreign organization, no foreign country is an altruistic observer to what is happening in India. So if they pump in a few $1 million into India through an NGO for a particular cause, they have a motive. Whatever that motive may be, but that motive would be directly related to what they hope to achieve in terms of their own self-interest. Now, I want to put across a very hypothetical case, and I think this is something which we must look at with great concern. Let us say there is an economic entity, we are having economic ties with a particular country, and we want to buy, say, atomic reactors. Now, country A wants to sell us these atomic reactors, and we want to put them in a place in, say, South India. Now, country B also wants to sell us atomic reactors. And they say, okay, how do we stop entity A from buying it, from selling it to India? So you have the NGO route. And now the Supreme Court has said that when they are agitating on accepted means of agitation, Rasta, Roko, Bandhs, dharnas, well, if a foreign entity starts pumping in millions of dollars, I think the economic activity in that particular place can actually be brought down to zero, forcing the government to change its stand.
Right.
Now, is that to the interest of the people of India? Or is that to the interest of that entity which not get that contract? Stretching the argument further, we want to, say, build a particular facility for buying, for manufacturing of, say, aircraft or tanks in India. It is a private entity. Now, a foreign entity wants to sell weapons to India, and they say if India starts manufacturing its own weapons, that may not be good for our industry. So, you have an NGO, a very nice NGO, you can give it a good name. In fact, every NGO has got a good name, and I'm not saying all NGOs are bad. Some are doing yeoman service. But now, with this foreign funding which that NGO is getting, they will say, okay, we will give you $100 million, stop this contract. Now, what happens? So, everything doesn't need to be related to politics. I can understand the Apex Court's submission to say that, okay, as far as politics, everything is not political. They could be having very good reasons for carrying out that dharna. But my point is those very good reasons could be economic.
Right.
They could be they could be anything. They could be social. They could be strategic. Then what do we do?
Right.
If they say that, okay, we don't want India to develop its nuclear facilities, then what do we do?
Sure.
That means we are actually encouraging foreign powers to stop our own strategic independence by permitting action of this nature.
Right.
And every bit of that action will be carried out as per law. That means they won't get violent. They will simply block the roads. They will say, okay, no trains will move, no road transport will move, nothing will move till such time as our demands are met. And I think that is working against the interests of the country. And I think the government must take a call to take up this case with a higher bench,
right,
and to see that a more relevant ruling comes in. At least I personally am very concerned about this particular ruling.
Let's get the legal perspective now, really, as far as this particular issue is concerned. But first, Satya Prakash, what is the history of the issue? Because it's not something that it has happened over the last 2 days. It's something that has been going on for some time now.
Well, it starts with 1976 Act. 1976 Act, there were too many loopholes. So the government decided to change it. So accordingly, in 2010, a new bill was introduced. The bill was passed. Section 5, which you have mentioned, that gives discretion to the government to block funding of NGOs if their activity is overtly of political nature. And here, that particular provision, read with certain rules framed under this act, they were under challenge before the Delhi High Court, which refused to listen, which actually dismissed the petition, and then the matter went to the Supreme Court. Before I come to the case, there are 2-3 points I would like to make. Democracy functions through institutions. There are formal institutions like legislature, executive, judiciary. There are institutions which are not directly mentioned under the constitution, but they are very relevant. One of them is media, and then the civil society. So all these institutions go on to make this democracy function, and this is how we are thriving democracy. Second, how much freedom can be given and what should be the entire framework. This framework is provided for under the FCRA Act. The provision which was under challenge, it was challenged because of the fact that the government felt that the money being received is being used for political activities. There is no problem with that. Earlier also, under the old Act, there were allegations that in a particular state, foreign fund was used during the elections, and that was in the 80s and 90s also similar allegations came. There was a case pending in the Supreme Court in which the funding of NGOs, and it was contended that lots of NGOs, they are not declaring their audited accounts before the relevant authorities, and CBI conducted an investigation, and thousands of NGOs, they were indicted for not filing their audited account as required under the law. But so far as this case is concerned, the Supreme Court has sought to draw a distinction between overtly political activity and normal activity of an NGO, which may be working in the field of human rights, working in the field of education or similar such activities. The court, what it did was, it has sought to draw a distinction between these two types of activities, and it has sought to draw a sort of strike a balance between the two, and then it did not strike down the law or the rules. They have in fact saved the rules with the caveat that unless and until the activity of the NGO concerned is not actively of political nature or extremely political nature, you cannot debar that NGO from receiving funds. Second, and then the government has to produce concrete material to prove that. These are the conditions that the Supreme Court has laid. There are 2-3 other points. While this is about all political, the government's power to declare some organization of an organization of political nature, the fact is that today political parties can receive funds from abroad. That's the irony. After the changes in the, I suppose 2 or 3 years ago, there were some changes introduced via Finance Act, and then the NGOs and whatever they have received since 1976, that cannot be looked into. One. Second is the funding of the political parties through electoral bond. Though electoral bond is a welcome step. Why? Because white money is getting into the electoral system. But at the same time, it remains opaque. Nobody can know. So that should be opened up. Transparency should be there to enhance the degree of democracy in India. This case is, now we are living in a completely different kind of environment. I am saying, why just political NGOs of political nature? I am saying there is 26% FDI in print media. Media is quite influential. There is 26% FDI in digital media, 49% FDI in television news media. I am saying now the entire situation has changed. There was a resolution of September 13, 1955 adopted by Nehru cabinet, which completely barred any foreign equity or any foreign investment in media, thoroughly 100% banned. But still, but thereafter it has been diluted. Now there are demands that in print media also it should be extended to 49%. So we are living in a completely different era. Yes, there should be monitoring of NGOs. Yes, there should be, if their activities are contrary to what their declared memorandum of association says, they should be banned and there should be action. But there cannot be blanket ban on receiving of foreign funds. The rules in this case, they did not describe everything in black and white, and there was some element of arbitrariness and it was a bit vague. So Supreme Court has given this clarity. They said unless the activities are overtly political nature, you cannot stop them from receiving funds, and that too you have to adduce concrete evidence.
Okay, all right, taking the discussion forward now. General, what has been the general track record of foreign NGOs and also foreign funding to NGOs here in India?
You see, I have seen NGOs working in the Northeast. I have seen, and we've also seen the activities of NGOs as far as in certain areas, states in South India is concerned. Now, there are many NGOs which have done a sterling job, right? Especially when it comes to healthcare. It has been selfless service. So my criticism is not against NGOs per se. It is against a select group of NGOs who always have a motive, and there will be intelligence agencies behind that NGO. Now, on the face of it, it looks very nice. If you, as I specifically mentioned, if you are looking into the left front, the conflict which has been raging for the past, in fact, right from the 60s onwards till now, there have been a very large group of NGOs which have been supportive of these activities. But when you look into the names and the formal charter of those NGOs, it sounds very, very good. It's very liberal. It is very heartening. But when you look into the activities, then there's a totally different picture. And you see, I think in some respect, I think that is where my concern lies. Because when the Apex Court uses the words, legitimate political activity includes dharna, stopping of roads, stopping of traffic, I do not consider that as legitimate activity. I think we need to change that definition. Because today, if India is to grow to any level, our forms of protest need to change. Is it okay for the Apex Court to say that we can close the main streets in Delhi? Is it okay for the Apex Court to say that we can close the railway system because a group of people will stop trains moving on a particular corridor till their demands are met? Now, I think these are the questions which we must answer. What is actually legitimate activity? That is where my concern is. And as I said earlier, there is no such thing as a lack of interest or economic interest or national interest. Foreign powers, if they give you money, they want something for that money. There is no altruism. So if Bill Gates says, I'm going to give India $500 billion or $1 trillion, there is something which he wants in return. The same goes for Facebook or for anybody else, right? We have their intelligence agencies of the Americans, of the Chinese, of everybody else. You see what China has done, just to put it into context, in the United States. They've had these centers which are called, I'm just forgetting the name of their sage,
Okay, they just have centers there. Okay.
Right, to promote Chinese culture. There are 10,000 of them. Now the Americans are getting concerned as to the activities of those particulars. Obviously, they are there to promote Chinese interests. They are not there to promote the interest of anybody else. So whenever a foreign funding comes in, I think we need to be careful. As very rightly said by my colleague, there are guidelines. Now, many of them are not following those guidelines.
Right.
But even if the guidelines are followed, I think activities which relate to a disruption of normal human life, which the apex court has said is okay. I think that is where my concern lies. Not in permitting them. Permitting them is fine. I think NGOs to get foreign funding, it may not be political. But to say that these activities are not political, I think I have got very serious reservations on that. Because when you start activities which hit at the very core of our democracy, which look into my rights. Now somebody else may have a right, but how about my rights? How about my rights to move on that train? How about my rights to use that road? How about my rights to go to that park? How about the rights of the millions of other Indians to use that? Now, how can the apex court say that those rights, it is okay for these people to block those rights?
Okay.
Then it is impinging on my rights. Right. And it would have a political connotation regardless of the way which we see it.
Okay. All right. J. Sai Deepak, advocate of the Supreme Court, joins us on the program. Now, let me bring him into the discussion. You know, J. Sai Deepak, we've spoken about the history of this particular problem. We've spoken about the risks as well. Let me take two legal aspects forward with you. One, of course, is what does Section 5 of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act state? Secondly, what can be termed as a legitimate means of dissent?
So firstly, Section 5 relates to the activities of a non-political organization, which is not strictly a party, so to speak, but which engages itself in political activity. If you look at the nature of the provision, and in fact the discussion which the Supreme Court has undertaken as part of this judgment, on the one hand, the court says that the question of vagueness is to be addressed in light of the spirit of the legislation and the objective it seeks to achieve. And then goes on to say that perhaps there is not too much of vagueness in the language that is used because the intent is clear and it is decipherable from the history of the legislation. And it has cited another judgment to support this point as well. Now, having come to that particular conclusion, the only thing that is left to ask yourself is, once you have understood the issue, once you have understood that this legislation has a specific intent, then how do you go about justifying the interpretation that unless and until you're in direct political activity, it is perfectly legitimate for an organization to receive funds from abroad for the sake of organizing bandhs or dissent or whatever it may be. Nobody questions the fact that at the end of the day, legitimate means of protest is permissible under the law, and there are certain forms that the law already recognizes. But who is pulling the strings? Who are the dramatis personae involved? Whose agenda is being pushed? What interests are being protected? Who are we lobbying for? Is this a genuine protest? Is the money that is being used to fund this particular protest legal, or is it being laundered? These questions, surely the government of a country has the right to ask, because at the end of the day, foreign investment in journalism is something that the law fundamentally frowns upon and thinks twice about allowing foreign investors in journalism because it shapes public narrative. Today, it can't be anybody's case that NGOs don't play a significant role in shaping public narrative. And if anything, there are any number of NGOs in this country which are created for the purposes of money laundering, any number of NGOs which are created exclusively for creating trouble. I think the Kudankulam nuclear reactor issue was very clear, wherein people realized that certain private foreign interests were responsible for creating stage managed protests in that particular place. Through what kind of organizations? So I'm slightly taken aback by this particular verdict of the court and that particular observation. While it is just one part of the observation and the rest of it has been upheld, and the court is clear that as long as you're qualified with a political activity or an overt political activity, you're subject to the FCRA. But the court has to realize that today we live in a world of grey. The binary world has long gone. There is nothing that is clear cut. Therefore, I think that is an aspect that the court should have been alive to in the day and age that we live in.
Okay, all right. So taking the discussion forward, now I'm going to take a point that the General was making earlier in the program as well forward, Satyaprakash. You know, so as far as in the name of supporting public causes, have foreign funders tried to push their own agenda here? How big of a problem is that, do you think?
As Sai has mentioned, Kudankulam nuclear reactor case, and there are several other cases in which it has been used. So there is no question. There is no question about NGOs being used for a particular purpose. Here the question is, we have a law and there is a provision which empowers the government to block foreign funding of certain NGOs if their activity is that of political nature. The question is the activity of political nature or the organization of political nature. What is the threshold beyond which you can call a particular organization of political nature? That's the question. The court is saying you should have concrete evidence, concrete material to support that, one. And second, that they should be actively involved in something of political nature. That's the only qualification they have done. They have upheld the section 5 and also Rule 3, various sub rules. So there is no question of law being not upheld. The law, they have upheld the law. The only clarification given is this. My question is, if you are allowing FDI in print, FDI in digital, FDI in television media, these are all much more influential medium, and thereafter you are also allowing foreign fund in political parties. Political parties can receive funds, and also there is the funding of political parties via electoral bond. It's quite opaque. So I am saying you make it, there should be transparency in political funding as well. Here, so far as this law is concerned, if there are any ambiguity and the government thinks that there is any problem, it can seek a review, and then it can be referred to a larger bench thereafter. Also, if they don't get any relief, they have every right to move a bill in Parliament and ask Parliament to amend the law. But my point is, this funding of NGOs is a question, but then funding of political parties also is a question, and there should be transparency in funding of political parties as well, because here the entire question is of political nature, activity of political nature, foreign funding in activity of political nature. That should apply to political parties as well.
Okay, all right. The scope should be widened, and also we have to ensure that there is transparency in the entire system. That's the way forward, is what you're suggesting. Let's get closing comments from all the panelists now on the best way forward really to, as far as this particular issue is concerned. General, starting first with you.
No, I think very frankly, I think I'm concerned because this interpretation which has been given by the Apex Court is open to abuse. And I think we will have foreign funders who will really try to derail certain aspects of our economic and strategic functioning. As far as the media is concerned, I'm not so much concerned about foreign funding of the media for a very simple reason. Media is so diverse and all forms of opinion are there. So you may have, if one particular entity is funding the media to give a particular opinion, rest assured there will be another entity funding it to give an alternate opinion. So as far as the media is concerned, you will get, or an individual, a citizen like me, a free citizen, I will get alternate opinions when I read 2 different newspapers or 20 papers. So that divide is already there, so I'm not really concerned about that. I am concerned about the ability of people to use their means of protest which have been cited by the Apex Court. And I think those means of protest, if money power is applied there, they can last out for very long periods of time, as Deepak Sai has so rightly said, on the nuclear power plant, and you can actually change the discourse. Now, I think that is hitting out at our strategic autonomy, and I think that is something which I think needs a rethought and a reconsideration.
Okay, Sai Deepak, what's the best way forward?
See, my concern is, in a year when somebody like George Soros has openly said that he's going to commit billions of dollars, specifically targeting countries like India, when a judgment such as this comes about, which loosens the controls on foreign funding of NGOs, it may end up actually inadvertently facilitating his designs, so to speak, or his intentions or objectives. I am very clear that it is not the nature of the organization that matters, but the nature of the activity that must be the center of attention, that must be the focal point. So whether you call yourself an NGO or you call yourself a political party, if you indulge in political activity or remotely a political activity, you must be subject to the transparency protocols under FCRA, which is the specific intention behind this legislation. So I don't believe that this judgment, even to the extent that it upholds the law but carves out this particular exception, so to speak, or creates an island, is a welcome judgment, because frankly, it could end up creating more trouble given the atmosphere that we are in, and with increasing reports coming about foreign funding of the CA protests or the anti-CA protests or anti-NRC protests. I am a bit disappointed and slightly shocked about the manner in which this judgment has been delivered, given the atmosphere we live in today.
Okay, all right. Sai Deepak, thank you for joining us on the program and sharing your views. Busy schedule, busy day for you, joining us from a busy place as well. Much appreciated. All right, taking the discussion forward now. So, closing comments from you, Satya Prakash, on the best way forward.
Well, I suspect the government will seek review of this judgment. One. Second, if the review is not in government's favor, the government can go ahead with some amendment, because this judgment they have in their own understanding, judges have tried to strike a balance. But if the government thinks that it doesn't serve the purpose or it is not in tune with the objective of this 2010 FCRA Act, they can introduce an amendment and ask Parliament to amend it.
Okay, all right. Thank you then to the both of you for joining me on the program and sharing your views and putting things into perspective for us. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.